As Alice said, this is our Vice Dean, Dean James. If you don't know her, you should. And then, of course, we are so lucky to have Brian Smith from ESPN. He is currently on Outside the Lines and E60. He's a New York-based correspondent. Before that, he had roles with ABC, CNN. He was also counsel for the Jaguars. And before that, he worked at multiple entertainment firms in New York, and we are so lucky to have him.
Great. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here.
Thank you.
Is it on?
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yep, there you go. Thank you.
So,
And a gift bag too. It can't be that.
it's perfect. The right colors too. It's great. So look, you are trained as a lawyer. You work as a journalist. Can you just give us a sense for how you got to this place? What drew you to the law, and then also what drew you to journalism?
Well, I'll be completely honest, full disclosure with the law. I was graduated from Syracuse, had no idea what I wanted to do, was living with my parents, and I had to get out. That's like straight up. But what really got me was, so my father, who's a psychologist, he started this diversity consulting business. And he had this one conference where he was working with justices on the Ohio State Supreme Court. And he invited me along just to work with them. And we were talking through these issues of diversity on the court. They were trying to address issues with the prison system in Ohio and how to change it. The depth of thought that they gave to issues inspired me. I was just overwhelmed. I had never seen people talk like that, think like that. And we were with them for about a week. And at the end of the week, I said, how did you get to this place in your life? And I asked questions, and they said, look, you should go to law school. You should apply to law school. And from that moment on, I made it my everything to get into law school. And that brought me there. Now, you talked about how I got into sports and journalism. I benefited from something that didn't feel like a benefit at the time, but ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me. And that was, I benefited from my own ignorance. I knew nothing about the law. I have no lawyers in my family. I have a distant cousin who is a lawyer who I'd never talked to about law ever. So when I went to Columbia, and when I walked in for the first day, we're all kind of hanging out, having a good time. And by like day 2 or 3 in, everybody started talking about what they wanted to do, which stunned me. I mean, it's like you go into college as a freshman and you say, well, I want to be a lawyer. Like, I didn't know that. So people were like, I want to be a white-collar lawyer. My dad is a taxation lawyer, and that's what I want to do. I want to do tax law. And I'm like, how do these people know this? So I just eventually came to a place where I said, you know what? I like sports. I like entertainment. People tell me anything's possible. That's the stuff I want to do. So I put it out there. It led me to the Jaguars, which eventually led me into doing a lot of sports and entertainment, and then eventually transitioning into journalism was sort of the same thing.
So, I'm not sure people would immediately think that the same skill set applies to both areas, right? And so, what aspects of your legal training do you use, and maybe surprisingly use, when you do journalism work?
Okay, so the first answer to that question is everything. And you'll see this as we talk today, but for me, I am the biggest pusher of law school ever. And I don't mean that from like, I just like law school. I mean, it's hard, obviously. It's not easy to graduate from law school. It's not easy to go to law school. It's definitely not easy to take the bar, trust me. But the one thing I've always loved about law is not only can you do anything with your degree, but it teaches you so much about the world that you don't even realize until you're in spots of trying to do new things in the world. So for me, what aspects? Okay, so the first thing was, when I was a lawyer, I worked with this entertainment lawyer who's been at the top of his field for years. And he always taught me, you know what? He's like, we're in entertainment. A lot of people we work with don't care a thing about a contract or a law or anything. That's not their job. That's not why we're here. We're here to take the complicated and make it simple. Everything I would say to him, if we had a client meeting, he'd ask me to go through things with him, and he'd say, okay, that's great. I have no idea what you're talking about. And he would make me explain things in the most basic terms, and it annoyed me no end. But when you're with the client's like, you're giving an example about, it's kind of like a cow on a farm. And it sounds really stupid, but people, that resonates resonates with people who don't know anything about a 50-page contract or an M&A deal that went down or how things impact their insurance on film. So that was one of the biggest things that I was able to apply in television. In television, I don't know, it's especially true of legal analysis. People come on and there's a big decision. Let's say there's a big decision recently in the Alston case in the NCAA, and it's scores of pages long, and it's detailed, and there's history, and nobody cares. They want to know the headline, what it means, our player's going to get paid. And you have to learn to talk in those terms. That was huge. The other thing I would say is the Socratic method, which I absolutely hate. Wait, can I tell you a quick story about the Socratic method? Okay, so when I went to law school, again, I come from a perspective of knowing nothing about law. Couldn't believe I was there. Don't really know how it happened. But anyway, I'm sitting there in Civ Pro, and the Civ Pro teacher was this like legendary guy named Hans Smith. He had been there for decades, and he was known for terrorizing first years, which is why they let him teach first year Civ Pro every year, which makes no
They
sense.
test us before we
Why?
do first year. Can you terrorize the first year?
He would terrorize people. So about 6 days in, he used Socratic method, and we were all afraid of it, but there was like 300 people in the class. He was never getting to me. Yeah, exactly. So I would just kind of sit back and listen, and I'm not worried. So one day he called on me, and I had no idea what he was talking about. So he's like, I can't even remember the question. I was so terrified. But I Mr. Smith, can you repeat the question that I asked you? Well, I didn't really hear you. And so then he starts spelling out every single word. Repeat after me, I'm like, the question is, that went on for about 4 minutes. Over and over, he made me so upset. And I was so terrified, he made me recite the question and the answer. So, I hope you didn't have that experience in law school. But what it did, this is to your point, the Socratic method, being able to think on your feet, being able to be ready for any question, and being able to really dissect an issue was something I had started learning in the Socratic method, continued through law school, and that's what you need on television and in journalism. So many people, you ask a question and they're giving you the answer they want to give you. But the way to stay and work on television is to really be able to not only answer the question, but be able to give another option and another option. And that really came from my law school training.
So this idea of sort of how we craft the stories, right? How you let an interview take shape based on the questions you're asking, but also responding to what people want to hear about. Talk to us about that process. How you decide what's newsworthy or what's media coverage, or how deeply the coverage should go.
Yeah, it used to be very easy. Actually, it was easier before I got in the industry because it used to be, we're the news, we tell you what you need to know, you listen.
Yeah.
Now it's totally different. The advent of social media, of everything that we see online, has created a completely different world when you talk about what you see on the news and what you see in sports and what you see in entertainment. People are crafting the narratives that they want to hear, and we have to at least pay attention to that. So, when you talk about how we come up with it, it's twofold. I think the first thing is we look at what's resonating with people. Because look, I'd love to be the person that says, you know, the news is this high-minded, news and sports in our industries, we're high-minded and we think deeply about these issues. It really isn't that deep. If we see people talking about LeBron's going to be on TV every other day. But there's another part of it that we do on Outside the Lines with E60, with the investigative unit, where we have a little bit of a different charge. And that charge is, even if our job is to bring unique stories to the public. So, how do we balance the two? I think the first thing we ask is it news? There's a lot of, can I just be honest, there's a lot of junk on the internet and on social media. People are just throwing things out there. And it's a really tough thing for us to parse out. The way I came up in the news business is, you don't want to be first, you want to be right. So there's a lot of people who are trying to be first, and they're throwing out different stories, and then we're supposed to pick those up because the public is saying, I want to know more about this. A good example is, I don't know how many of you follow football, but the Aaron Rodgers story was something we struggled with just yesterday. Aaron Rodgers is this big-time quarterback. His coach was Mike McCarthy, and Mike McCarthy got fired mid-season, and then McCarthy was talking about it recently, and then Aaron Rodgers allegedly, according to some,
didn't like certain things about the way he coached. And then other people cropped up and said, yeah, this guy was terrible. He did this, he did that. Mike McCarthy's denying it. What do you do with that story? Well, it's news, so you want to cover it. But what we do, and what I try to do, is I try to look at it like, and this is where law helps, and why we need more lawyers as journalists. I look at it like, from a legal standard, not a news standard, a legal standard. If I said something like this in a courtroom, would that pass muster? Like if some guy just randomly said that is not affiliated with me, that I don't know anything about, says some source said so-and-so that Rogers didn't like this about McCarthy, would that be something I would repeat in a court or to a client or to my partners if I was working in a law firm as this is what's happening in this industry? No. So when I do it, I leave those things out and I cover what I think passes that kind of muster. For me, it's a higher bar, and you don't always get to be the top person with the best news off. You know, your Twitter feed's not blowing up because 20,000 people are like, oh, you had it first. But what's happening is, I believe, the same thing that you need in law. You're establishing credibility. Your reputation and your name is the only thing you have. Jobs come and go, your reputation travels everywhere. And if you're constantly trying to be first on things, then you're going to have trouble, because being first doesn't always mean in today's day and age getting all the news.
What does it mean that people can talk back to you? You put up the news and they have commentary, they like your stand, or they say,
The first thing I could say is, don't ever attack a university on anything. Every time we do a report, Larry Nassar, I had to get off Twitter. Every single time we did anything on Larry Nassar, anything, trolls, thousands of them, flooding your page, saying the most vile thing, all the time. It's hard. It's hard. A couple years ago, I had this idea. Maybe about a year after I got to ESPN, I had this idea of like, there are so many high schools and elementary schools that have these great sports stories out there. I want to tell those stories. So I want people to come at me with different stories they have, and let me see what they're about. Maybe there's a way I can try to work them into shows that I do, things that I do. We do this program on Outside the Lines called the Friday Four, and I was like, maybe I can create a separate segment for that. So I did that for a while, and then I think it was Penn State? No, there was another college crisis that came up. And it's like, I kept doing that, but then for weeks, I could not get the flood of people criticizing on the other things out of the way. And then I couldn't even see the stories anymore, and it became something you kind of had to drop. So now I have to find different ways to get at that. It's hard, but the good thing about it is you really get to see what's resonating with people. It's a tough balance. You want to cover things that people are talking about, but you also want to bring in things that resonate. But you also have a really important post. You see things that I see things that other people don't see just because I'm at ESPN or at ABC. So you want to expose some of those things. My thing is, the rule I try to follow is, give people what they don't have first. If they want to hear about the other stuff, there are so many other people they can hear that from. I can be one of them, but give them that information first. And as far as people responding, I gotta tell you, I'm not a big social media guy. Like I sort of ran out of patience for it, because I don't feel like people really want to know. Legal analysis especially, it kills me. Whenever there's a big legal issue, I get flooded with tweets. Explain this concept to me. How am I gonna do that in 140 characters? And then when you don't, it's like, well, I don't get it because it's this, and then they're attacking you. It becomes a lot. Like sometimes, if it's something really important, I'll record a video, put that out. That'll explain a lot of things. But in general, I like the feedback, but if the feedback's not going to be positive, it becomes more of an annoyance than a service.
So I like that you said that you want to give people what they need, the information they need.
Yeah.
And for me, that's really about, it's an essential part of democracy, right? Journalists exist to help sustain a democracy. If people don't know what's going on, they can't participate.
Right.
And you see that same commitment as a lawyer. And what am I doing to uphold our commitments as a democratic project? So do you feel that, is there a weightiness that goes with that work, right? How am I participating in this democracy, even though, yes, I'm on TV, but there's something long-term there that has to be maintained.
Absolutely. The law is kind of like my parent. It is. It like follows me everywhere. Whenever I'm covering something, I always think like, what would my parents think? You know, am I doing this the right way? Like, especially when you're doing the hot take, which I'll be honest with you, I don't really like doing that. But just being at ESPN, you end up doing it. It just happens. And you're doing it.
What do you think on the spot, go?
But it's like and it's difficult. At least for me, I have to fight this urge to be like, I'm in the bar with my friends and I really want to just spout off when that may have no basis in reality or actual truth. So, but the law really serves as my parent. Because when I am on those kinds of shows and I am saying things, and I do have that temptation to really go at somebody and be like, yeah, well, you say LeBron's done, here's why he's not, and blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. The law kind of sits on my shoulder a little bit, and it's like, remember where you came from, remember what you're upholding, and I'm going to say this over and over again. A job is a job. I love my job. It's a job. The law is my career. You know what I mean? So I hope to be in this job for a while. I may not, maybe in some other job, but the law will follow me. So it almost, the first priority that I have is to that. And to me, when you're practicing law, you're doing journalism, if you don't, this is how I always found it. If you don't have some sort of higher-minded concept as to why you're doing what you're doing, whether it's an M&A deal, whether it's something in entertainment, whether it's something in sports, whether you're doing tax, accounting, I don't know. If you don't have some sort of higher-minded idea, at least in my mind, as to why this is important to society, it becomes very hard to do. Because then, what's your purpose? Like, I was at Paul Weiss for a while, and I was doing sale leasebacks for a while. I don't know if you guys know what that is. It's kind of like this complicated sort of real estate lease financing kind of transaction. Everybody thought it was super boring. But the way I looked at it was, it's a chance for me to learn something new about business that I don't know. So I can take this and maybe apply it somewhere else down the line. Maybe I can use this to do something that I want to do later or something for somebody else. Without that sort of higher-minded concept, it becomes hard when you're spending all-nighters at the firm or, hours trying to figure out a story or, days and days reporting on something. So having that parent on my shoulder that is the law in a way really helps that.
The other thing that lawyers do is serve as counsel to people during dark times, right? And I tell students all the time that you are the one person who's going to be witness to some of the lowest points in a client's life. Something terrible has happened, and they've come to you, not just to fix it legally, but to help walk them through that moment. But journalists do the same work as well. So I want to talk a little bit about the tougher news stories that maybe you've had to deal with or cover. So the Sandy Hook shooting, for instance.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about how one covers that in a way that is not only faithful to the news, but also is fair to the people who are impacted by it?
Yeah, I went to Sandy Hook. So this was actually, I'm relatively new in journalism, so I was in law I was practicing full time for 12, 13 years. Was a partner at a firm in LA, and then transitioned into journalism over time. So Sandy Hook was the first, I'd say, mass tragedy that I covered. The first thing for me was that to me was the toughest experience in getting myself out of the story. Like, you go there, it's emotional. I mean, it's like kids killed, and the whole town. It's a very small town in Connecticut, and the whole town was just not only just like destroyed mentally, but it was like flooded with journalists. So imagine imagine a neighborhood of like 20,000 people that just has this mass shooting, and then the next day it's like people are screaming about their pancakes not being right. Do you have any like vegan options? I'm from New York City, that kind of stuff. It was sad, and it was hard not to want to be a part of that story and sympathize, but yet you're trying to sort of give them time for their grief. So, to me, the biggest lesson from doing a story like Sandy Hook was you can't be a part of the story. It's a big thing these days. Like you'll see it on TV. A lot of people are trying to put themselves in the story. I do it sometimes depending on what show I'm on. I do a show called 2020. It's a show where we put ourselves in the story and walk with the viewer through it. But when you're doing the news just day to day, you're putting yourself in the story. It's not only insensitive sometimes to the people, but it also, it doesn't help you see the entire story the same way. You're getting so emotional, you're not actually getting the information. So that was a tough thing there. The other thing is, I had never seen what it was like to be a part of a mass tragedy. When you're in a situation like that, it's like the people, they're happy they're there. They're happy that you're there to cover it, but they're so incensed that you're there basically to take advantage of their grief. And that's what it feels like. And so the role that you end up playing, and the role that a lot of journalists I talk to end up playing is, we have to cover this from a distance. Like, we have to kind of stand back. And at the end of all of it, like, I think the last day I did a live hit from there, this woman came up to me on the street, and she gave me this teddy bear. And she was like, I saw you covering Sandy Hook. I was on HLN at the time. So I saw you covering Sandy Hook. And I really liked how you guys didn't try to be a part of what we were doing and hold group discussions with all the parents. And I mean, that's stuff that we want to see as America, but the shooting just happened like a week ago. People had lost their children. So she was like, I really like what you did. I just want to give you this, just so you remember that, not everybody here hates journalists. It's a thing that I think we fight in journalism right now. And we fight it in law too. People don't like us. They think that we're not good people. And I've always felt like, as a lawyer, you talk about the difficult things you deal with your clients on. I've always felt like you're not always going to be the most liked person in the room, but you can still be compassionate and kind, even when you're dealing with those tough circumstances with clients. Like, I've had many of those. And it's like you can still deal with them with compassion without trying to exploit or expose their grief.
I know I have young children. I know you have young children.
Yeah.
So
5-year-old twins.
Oh my God.
Yeah, boys.
Are you sleeping yet?
Finally.
Finally.
For a minute. They could never be here. We would all get no peace. What's this? What's that? Let me see the camera.
What does it mean to cover a story like that? And like you said, you're trying to take yourself out of it, but at home you have reminded that it might have been you.
I didn't have them I didn't have kids at the time, but I've covered others since then, and it's heartbreaking. Like, I really have to kind of sit down before I cover it. It's just, you know what it is? It's it's funny. I'm talking about, as a lawyer, having a distance, and we aren't taught that in a sense. We're kind of taking ourselves at a distance from our clients, but I've done a lot of these tragic situations. I do a lot of crime, so I end up in a lot of prisons with people and with victims and rape victims and people who've had people murdered and murderers and people who've had a lot of tragedy. And it's like, I've kind of come to a place on it where, in order to be able to tell the story but also have compassion, I actually have to sit down before I do a story like that, or before I travel, and I have to say, I have to kind of have a moment. I don't know if you meditate. I don't really meditate, but I just kind of have a quiet moment, and I just say, I'm here to do a job, but I'm also here to be compassionate. And the compassion is part of the story, but the story comes first. I'm not here to antagonize people. I'm here to actually get information and share it, and I am not a part of the story. And that helps me get the distance while also trying to get the story and the connection, because it's hard. These stories, there was I won't repeat what it was, but I was doing a report once, when I first got into TV. I was doing a lot of crime, because on a legal background, when you're doing legal analysis, you end up doing a lot of it on crime. And the story was so horrifying, I can't even really repeat the details, but I was maybe doing this for about a year, and it was the story of this woman who had been horribly abused. And they were talking to me about the legal issues on air, and I was going through it, and they put me in a car, and I was on the way home, and I literally broke down in tears, and I was like, I don't think I can do this job. This is there's too much ugly things, too much ugly stuff that happens in the world. But the bottom line is, it can be done. Even working with same with tough clients, that helps me deal with a lot of it. It's it can be done, just as long as you have a way of handling it. What am I about here? Am I going to try to bring out the compassion? Am I going to give them a little space to grieve, but also try to pursue the story? Am I going to, and look, some people are the kind of people who say, I want to exploit that. Great, but if you don't have some sort of moral compass that you're attaching to this work, it can become very difficult and overwhelming. And I've seen it happen to journalists. It's like they're unexpectedly breaking down or doing kind of crazy things on there. A lot of times it comes from not having that sort of moral compass of what am I about in this interview and in this work.
Do you ever have times when, as a lawyer, you're doing the journalist work and you're thinking, based on your legal background, I know this needs to change, right? And so you have moments of, do I step in? Do I highlight problems with this law? I remember when the Trayvon Martin verdict came out, you know, emotionally that was tough. I remember standing over my son's crib and crying after I heard the verdict. And then there was also this other part of my brain that was talking, you know, when I spoke to people, I think they say, well, the law says this and this is why, you know, I could not help but say, I think there has to be a change because this outcome. How do you balance that?
Well, for me, the biggest thing is, so it depends on what the role is. This is I gotta tell you guys, the toughest thing about being an anchor or anything in TV right now is the roles constantly shift. And in law, I was not used to that. Like, when I was practicing law, it's first you're an associate, and then you're on the partner track, or maybe not, or you go somewhere else, maybe you go in-house. It's like you always kind of know what your job is at many different stages. In TV, since I've been doing this, which I'd say is about 6 or 7 years, it's shifted like 3 or 4 times. When I first got into it, all we had was anchors reading prompters, and they weren't really saying anything, and you had a couple of experts here and there. Then it became, now anchors have to say something, which threw off a bunch of anchors who did nothing but read prompter. And then that's why you saw a lot of crazy anchors saying really strange things. And then it became talking heads. So now people aren't really even anchors anymore. A lot of times they're just talking about things. And then it became, well, now we're going to talk about things, and sometimes we don't even have all the information. Everybody's okay with that, which is, it's maddening. Because I mean, it comes from the law. You're thinking, well, I gotta have I gotta have everything buttoned up tight. I don't want people to say that I'm wrong. And other people are like, I don't care. Yeah, exactly. But Trayvon Martin's a really good example, because with that was sort of before the time. Covering trials is always very difficult, because you have this tough line as a lawyer where you're covering the trial, you're reporting what's happening, you're talking to people on air or people who are involved, and at the same time, you're also providing analysis. So what I always did was, I'm going to give the information first, and then I'm going to give the analysis, but I'm going to delineate the two.
Okay.
I think the problem comes when they overlap. Like, I have a friend in the industry who shall remain nameless, who was very big on overlapping the two. And she became very, very famous in this area. But the problem was it came back to bite her in the you-know-what. Because it's, you know, after a while, it's like, well, what is this person saying? I can't believe anything they're saying. Because where's the analysis, where's the news? Like, this happened, wait, is that true what you're saying? Yeah, and the stand your ground issue became a really important issue in that way. People kept saying, like, you know, I can't believe George Zimmerman got off, this is ridiculous. To me, in that discussion, there was not enough discussion about changing the law. And I remember I was with Court TV at the time, and we tried to hold we held a couple panels, I think, about the stand your ground law, what it means, how to change it. There is not enough of that in television. It's like we're so afraid to sit down and listen to things for a couple of minutes that we're just going to go off with some opinion. I mean, there was a law in place that shouldn't have been there, no matter what you think about what George Zimmerman did or not. I mean, we all have our own opinions. But the big problem there for me was the law. That someone could do what he did and that it was justifiable under the law. So for me, what we do as lawyers, and what part of my responsibility I felt was to talk about that. Not just this is where we go, the outrage. I'm outraged, I'm outraged, I'm outraged. And then you know what happens? 2 months later, we move on to something else. And then everybody forgets. How many people around the country are talking about stand your ground laws now? 0. So I feel like part of my job is I look for things like that. So I look for things like stand your ground. I look for things like that and try to think of how can I bring this discussion back up in a way that helps explain what it's really about.
Yeah, and I'd be productive going forward. If you
Right.
don't like it, I might be changing it.
Yeah, I feel like that's the job of a lawyer journalist. Like that's sort of our higher purpose. We have the ability to know certain things about the law that people don't know, and the law affects people in ways they don't even imagine. Like, it's funny to me how people don't even see how important the Supreme Court is, and really I've always thought it's the most important branch of government. I mean, but it's our job to try to, at least in my mind, to not only cover the story, but to make sure that we are informing people on the concepts of the law. Again, the complicated, making it simple, in order to tell them how they can change things and how their lives are really being impacted.
So I want to shift now to a
Yeah.
couple of sports stories.
Yeah.
I know you don't want to do hot takes from me.
I'll do hot takes. But where's Stephen
The collapse of the AAF.
Ah.
What is going on with that?
A? So this is funny. So do you guys, how many of you guys follow the AAF? Do we know the AAF is? The Alliance of American Football? This was going to be the new minor leagues for the NFL, or so we thought. And this league, the first week out, it did great. It was like, there was an NBA game on, Russell Westbrook and Oklahoma City was playing, and their numbers were as good as the Oklahoma City game, which was kind of cool. People liked the pace of play, they liked the players, the game was great, they had all these new technological advances, but they didn't have any money, and they went too fast. And the funny thing was, so I had the guy who runs it, this guy Charlie Ebersol, I had him on like 2 weeks before it collapsed on Outside the Lines, and he had just gotten this $250 million investment. And I was like, so what's that investment for? And he's like, oh, it's for the future, and we're doing fine. And I said to him, I was like, well, you know, there were rumors that you couldn't even make payroll 2 weeks ago. He was like, wow, that was a payroll company glitch. But let me tell you, everything's on track. So I said, so then you're going to be paying your players for the rest of the season then? He said, absolutely. Oh, that was wrong. Yeah, exactly. So basically, look, that whole, what I think is interesting about that entire situation is, I think people are quick to go to, there can never be a competitor league with the NFL. And I was just, we actually had Oliver Luck at the XFL on a couple days ago. And he runs the XFL. Now, if you guys want, XFL is Vince McMahon's new football league. It failed like 15 years ago. Now he's putting all this money into it. The biggest thing is, with all these football leagues, is surprisingly, insurance. That's their big issue. Because paying the vendors, also very important. But the insurance problems are huge for these football leagues. Millions and millions of dollars. In fact, I might get this wrong, I want to sort of say reportedly, because I'm not entirely certain, but I think there was either an Atlanta or a Florida football team that couldn't practice in their home state because they couldn't get insurance coverage. So what's interesting is these leagues, I think with the AAF, they got some really quick interest, some really great press, and they said, let's go. Charlie Ebersol's a brilliant guy, but he's also sort of a TV guy a little bit, and maybe went a little too fast. And what I think is interesting is the XFL is trying to position themselves really nicely, because they're still a year and a half out. They have like $250 million right now, and McMahon's talking about putting it up to $500 million, which is a lot of money to cover the first season. But here's the thing. This is my own personal thing with that. I still don't want to see guys who can't make it in the league play football. That's always been my biggest problem. It's like I watch the AAF and I'm like, yeah, it's a good game, but I could go to the local high school and watch a good game.
Oh, wow.
You know? I don't mean it, but I mean seriously. I don't really, it's still not gonna, I'm not gonna buy season tickets.
Okay.
And it's a tough thing. The XFL, I think, is looking at it. They told us this week, they were saying, you know, we're looking at guys who we know we're not going to get the top draft pick. We're not going to be in competition to get Kyler Murray, but or maybe Miami will get Kyler Murray, right? No, I don't think so. but they felt like they had a chance to get some top players out there, like players that might not have their college eligibility, stuff like that. But there's not enough of those guys to really move the needle for me. So what are you going to do? Have Johnny Manziel and a couple other guys? So for me, I think it was interesting. The AAF was an interesting experiment. I think having the money is key, having the plan is key. But ultimately, the survival of a league like that, if you can't get tied to the NFL, which I think the NFL, I'd be surprised to see the NFL tie themselves to the XFL, but you never know. If you can't get guys who are in that top tier, then it might be difficult to have a sustaining league. 1 year, yeah. 2 years, maybe 3. But is everybody going to stick around for something where they're not watching the Todd Gurley's or I was about to say Ryan Tannehill, I'm sorry. I was about to say, so Todd, you know, if they can't see all the top guys play.
Okay, NCAA v. Austin.
Yeah.
Right. That case could have been you have to play athletes. That's not what it said. What were your thoughts about?
So this was an interesting one. So how many of you are familiar with the Ed O'Bannon case? Yeah, it's a big one, right? So
The Ed O'Bannon case, so I won't belabor you with all the details of that, but the essential part of that was, one outcome of that was, now colleges were offering kids the full tuition package. Not a lot, not the money, all that kind of stuff. It all came out of this name and likeness discussion. It used to be just tuition, now it's tuition and books and things like that. So this to me was the next sort of, this decision is sort of an extension of that. I think the thing everybody's attaching themselves to is, well, this Alston ruling wasn't any good for the players because they're not getting paid. And it's true. I mean, when you look at it in the details, they were trying to sort of get paid, name and likeness, other things, trying to open up the idea of what a scholarship is, and trying to say colleges shouldn't be able to be limited just by giving scholarships and books. So this judge, who also decided the Ed O'Bannon case, kind of came back and said, all right, they should, if a conference can agree, they can offer more, like instruments and other things related to education. So Zion Williamson can get a saxophone. That's great. But when you think I'll say there's a big negative for me and a big positive. So let's start with the negative. The big negative for me is, I was looking at something the other day, I'll come back to it in a second. The big negative for me is, I don't want to throw shade on this judge, because I think this judge is actually moving the ball along. I'll get to that in a second. The big negative in this is, we are still as a society, the NCAA's arguments and how they're claiming victory in all this, first of all, we are still in this place with the NCAA where they are acting like this notion of amateurism. We cannot, they recently came out this week saying we cannot allow athletes to gamble as if athletes are all up in a casino gambling every 5 seconds. We cannot allow them to profit. These arguments of, it's going to disturb the integrity of the game if we pay players, how would we do it? The fact that they are so tone deaf to what the world is saying from every corner right now is just shocking to me. And it's funny, we had a senator on yesterday from Connecticut who said he met with the NCAA, did all these studies about how the kids, they make all this money off the kids, and the NCAA, in the face of a senator, was still like, yeah, we're not really going to do anything about that right now. They feel so powerful. I hope that legislators in Congress do something about this. I asked them repeatedly, what can they do? I don't know yet, but if they don't do something by the end of the year, maybe we'll do something. I hope they do, because honestly, this organization has become so large and so unwieldy that they can't even hear the arguments today when they're looking at people paying $4,000 a seat to see Zion play. He gets injured, his career might be over, and everybody else still makes money. But the good side of this is, I think it moves the ball along. I know giving them extra education, so the idea is if a conference agrees, then all the schools in that conference can offer kids not only the college scholarship, but also little other educational benefits. I look at that the way I look at how precedents work in our legal system. We slowly move it forward, you know? Yeah, and so now we're here. Well, Bannon got us here. Now we're here. And then you can obviously see how I feel about players getting paid. Now we're here. Next, it might be something else. And maybe, finally, somebody on the federal level jumps in and says, there has to be some compensation here. Because that's the bottom line. We are looking at a system where kids are being used and abused by the NCAA. And look, I acknowledge the value of a scholarship. I acknowledge the importance of the education. But I played sports in college, and I can tell you how tough it is to make it to class and take advantage of that wonderful educational gift you get, because you're there to play sports. And my bigger issue is I'm not here to like blast the NCAA. My bigger issue is how we're not spending enough time looking at the kids and their experience. Just one more thought on this. Kelvin Sampson had he's coach at Houston. He had this really great comment about his team getting to the tournament. He was like, we got to change something about the rules. I'm not talking about paying players. I'm saying there are parents that want to see their kids play and they can't even find a room to stay in. They can't even afford it. They're sleeping on college kids' floors. Like, that's where we are in society. That's what we're going to let happen. Just people are going to make billions off of kids' names and likenesses and not pay them a dime. And we can't even give parents a place to sleep so they can see their kid realize his dream. Like that to me is where, as a country, we have to kind of step in and say, what are we going to do to protect the kids? Yeah, we're not talking about like 50-year-old men and women. We're talking about 16, 17-year-old kids.
Kaepernick and collusion.
Yeah.
How much was that settlement, you think?
How much was that what?
The settlement, how much you think it was?
$75 million. I have no idea. Can I ask a question? So this is a good one. I'm so glad you brought this up. How many people? So I guess there were all we have no idea, by the way. I'm here to report, but we have no idea how much money he made. But let me ask you this. Let's say it was $10 million. Of all the people, first of all, how many people know about the Colin Kaepernick collusion case? Okay, that's a lot of people. Great. How many people, if he got $10 million from it, how many people think that was a good deal? Nobody.
From who?
Just one for Kaepernick. Just one. Oh, this is great. Okay, so I have a different opinion from everybody but one of you. So here's the thing. That was part of the reporting out there that he only made $10 million. Only he and Eric Reed in their settlement.
And it was, maybe even pre-tax, right? So
Yeah.
maybe less of
And then
tax.
before lawyers and all that. So if you take out legal fees and taxes, he made 85 cents. So here's how I look at that. I think LeBron inadvertently kind of brought up something that kind of set people's expectations in a certain way, because LeBron was on his show, The Shop, and he said, I hope he made enough money to, was it on The Shop or a press conference? I can't remember. But he said, I hope he made enough money to set his family up for life. Now, first of all, maybe $10 million does do that, even in this economy. But I think people thought, well, if he doesn't get hundreds of millions, then he's A, selling out, or B, has no case, or C, completely got ripped off in this entire deal since he'll never play football again. Now, I don't think there's a great chance that he'll play in the NFL. You never know. I don't think so. But actually, let me not say that. You really never know with the NFL. I mean, literally, I could be playing tomorrow. But here's what I thought. What were the owners really afraid of? The owners of the NFL, whether they colluded or not, and by the way, this is the one thing I kept saying on air over and over again. It is really difficult to prove collusion. Just think about it. It's not two guys in the corner over there while we're having this conference saying, like the head, the owner of Miami and the owner of Dallas, Jerry Jones and is Ross still? Yeah. Okay. Jerry Jones and Steve Ross talking about, you know what? Let's not sign Colin Kaepernick. I don't like him. Yeah, Steve, that's a good idea. Okay, let's go back to the conference. That's not how it works. That's not how it works. We're talking about, first of all, if that discussion happened, where's the record of that discussion? Secondly, let's say somebody was crazy enough to put that in an email. Hey, Stephen, this is Jerry Jones. You should not sign Colin Kaepernick. I really don't like him. I don't like the anthem protest. He's totally unpatriotic. Not even a nice guy. Don't like the afro. So it's like, what do people think is out there? But I can't tell you. I would say this over and over again, and people were like, well, there's a smoking gun. Mark Carrico says so. Is that a case? These are incredibly savvy owners.
And they have to prove that it actually impacted the players out, right? So if you can prove, well, no, we said we were going to collude, but actually he just stinks. We didn't sign him.
Exactly, and that's the other part of this. These are subjective decisions. I remember when Josh Johnson got signed by the Redskins, everybody's like, how did they sign Josh Johnson? He was out of the pro league. You're like, nobody even knows who that is. Like, how could they do this? He's been out of football for 2 years. They can do it because it's their prerogative. And part of the time, having worked in football, the things that people apply to who they want on the team, and this is actually totally being honest about it. I worked under Coughlin when he was in Jacksonville. Great coach. Liked a certain kind of player, right? Really liked a certain kind of player. He's a brilliant guy who wants to sign the best player he can find, obviously. But when you talk about guys who might be the backups, you want a guy, I think, and from what I saw, not all the time, but there might be a tendency to say, well, I like this guy better. This is a guy who knows my system better. This is a guy who I just like more. These decisions are often subjective. And then there's the idea of when you bring in Kaepernick, what will he represent to your team? Forget about the anthem protest. Will he want the role that you have for him? Or will that fit in with your team? My opinion, I'm not a football guy. I'm not an X's and O's guy, but I do look at it and say, well, how come this guy isn't playing? But how come he's not playing is not the same as collusion. Collusion, I want written evidence, I want some proof, I I want all of this. So getting back to my other point, why was, in my mind, this a win for Colin Kaepernick, even if he made less than $10 million? The one thing I think owners didn't want in this was discovery. Because think about how discovery works, right? We want you to turn over everything relevant to the case. Well, what's that, a couple documents and some emails? No, everything. I have been part of many discoveries. You are turning over a lot. Do you think owners wanted to do that? No. So to me, as I looked at it, and again, I'm probably in the minority, I looked at it like, what you have here is a little bit of a precedent. If there is something where there might be something with these owners, they're going to settle. And for me, what does that settlement say? That settlement could be, and again, I'm not saying it is, could be construed as maybe there was something there. Maybe there was something that made it a little harder for Colin Kaepernick to sign because of his stance on different issues. So again, not saying that's the case, but to me, not only does it establish a precedent for other players, if you've got something to say and other teams don't like you, now you kind of know how the NFL is going to react. And now you know it might be valuable to bring a collusion case. And by the way, collusion cases are not something that are brought every day in the NFL. I mean, this is kind of rare. So to me, the fact that he got any money was a win. And then the second thing being, now we kind of see, if you're a person who's looking at the NFL and trying to see what their practices are like, you can see how the NFL is going to treat that in terms of discovery. So, I don't know, I saw it as, I couldn't believe he got that much money because there was a very good chance he was not going to win that case unless he had something that no one knew about or was incredible, or would have been really, really strange for an owner to do.
Okay, last one before we do Q&A? So last question before Q&A?
Yep.
Because everyone wants to talk about Beyonce and Adidas.
Ah! That just happened, right?
That just happened. I mean, do you have thoughts about, so she's not an athlete, she's obviously an entertainer.
Yeah.
Sports organizations align entertainers. So this is an interesting, I think, union though. It's not like Nike and Kaepernick, right?
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, Adidas, I was like, I hope she's cool with everything that's going on with that corruption trial. But, right, sure you want to tie yourself to that. But no, and you know what? To me, it speaks to the broadening of brands. And it's interesting. I think it puts an athlete, if any of you are interested in sports representation, I think it's putting an athlete in a really interesting position. Because it used to be sneakers, apparel, that's the athlete's domain. We want to sign Giannis and LeBron, and those deals will always happen. But what about the sort of like guys who just make the all-star team, the Chris Middletons, the Josh Richardsons, the guys who are like on the cusp of things? Those guys, there would always be, in the past, little things that they could do. Now you've got entertainers going into that, it started with Kanye, now Beyonce. People are, I think the public, especially with social media, is kind of overlapping the brands a little bit. They're looking at it like, I like Beyonce, I like her music, I like what she's about, I buy her sneakers. Yeah. And brands are looking at that and saying, yeah, we're going to sell a lot more Beyonce sneakers than we'll sell Josh Richardson sneakers. So, to me, I think it puts the athlete and athlete management in really interesting positions because now, over time, I think this is going to broaden a little bit more. And you have to ask yourself, if you're not LeBron or Giannis or Russ or all those guys, will there be money and deals out there for you?
I'm totally buying Beyonce.
Really?
Absolutely.
I think I would too.
I'm like running to the store right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's gonna make them amends? No?
Maybe.
Jay-Z
I mean,
sneakers.
Jay-Z and Mr. Beyonce also has some stuff. So should we open it up for